Hello everyone and welcome to another Fusion 360 Tech Thursday. My name is Brad Tallis. I have Jason helping me on the keyboards. Today we're going to be doing the last part 8 of this Laser Projector project we've been working on. And honestly, I got to thinking about it this morning. This is part 8, and so we've literally designed this whole thing in about 8 hours, 8 to 10 hours. We ran long on a couple of them. So the fact that Fusion allows us to go from an idea in our head to a whole assembly in our hand, I think is pretty cool. Before we start, I'm going to, of course, change here. Bring up this Fusion 360 YouTube channel page. We are doing a ton of live streams. So here you can see the one we're in right now. Tomorrow we're doing a cam hangout. 5-axis tips and tricks. Jason's doing one on AnyCAD. We even have some people on our team doing some of these in different languages. And then make sure you don't miss next Thursday. You can see it's scheduled for April 30th at 12 o'clock Mountain Time. We're doing our hangout with our special guest Lars, where you can post questions and we'll see what we can do to answer them live during that live stream. We won't be showing any like Fusion stuff for that. We'll just be kind of talking and sharing some of our stories and stuff like that, but please feel free to attend and ask questions. And we're going to share some information like where did we come from, what's our favorite feature in Fusion, etc. Okay, so today what we're going to work on is we've pretty much got this whole assembly complete. And now I want to create like an exploded view of it and some drawings of it. So that's what we're going to do. Now I've included this assembly. It's in the description of the YouTube video. So if you want to download it, like if you haven't completed this whole thing and you want to try things out, feel free to download that file. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through two different environments. We're going to learn about the animation environment, and then we're going to do some stuff in the drawing environment. In fact, you'll notice drawing from animation. Okay, so I'm going to switch into the animation workspace, and I've already completed this, but you can kind of see this exploded view or exploded representation of this assembly. And I'm going to go through and show you how did I go about doing this. Okay, so with the animation module, it's kind of broken down almost like editing video, for example. And we have things what we call storyboards. So this you can kind of think of as a storyboard. Now I left this up so you can kind of see what the final product's going to look like, but I'm going to create a new storyboard. And when I do that, a clean one basically, it's going to go back to its fully assembled situation basically. Okay, in the transform menu we have a lot of commands, and you'll notice we have auto explode one level, auto explode all levels, and manual explode. Now unfortunately we're not going to use any of these today. Actually, I should say fortunately we're not going to use any of these today, and the reason for it is these explodes kind of do a radial or like a spherical explode, and this device has a lot of things that are kind of like in line with each other, all of the components inside the housing. I don't want it to go, radially or spherically. I kind of want them to stay in line. So I actually find using the transform components and doing it myself is actually faster and easier than using these explodes. Okay, for example, when I do a manual explode, it asks for a direction and a spacing and all that kind of stuff. We're just going to transform these components, and I think you'll see why here in just a moment. Okay, once we've transformed all of those, we can then save this and bring that into a drawing. So I'm going to start by just saying transform components, and you'll notice that it's asking which components, and you'll notice it's plural, which means we can do more than one at a time. So I'm going to just start with expanding the components over here, and I'm going to expand open this whole assembly so I can see everything that's in here. Okay. Now, if I look at the front view, you'll notice that the main unit of this is kind of at an angle, and we kind of did that using that pivot joint, the rotational joint right here. And so it's kind of at an angle, and that's going to come into play here in just a second. So I'm going to click on that first component and notice that the direction arrow is actually in line with this component. So it's not just straight horizontal. So this is great. So I'm going to go ahead and just drag this, and it's almost like we're pulling that off of the assembly. Now, I don't care how far. I could be very specific. I could make everything move 1 inch or something like that. But in this case, I'm going to just start moving some of the components, okay? Now, I've just moved this front thing. I could go ahead and say okay, and you'll notice that it captured that into our animation timeline. But I'm going to show you some cool tricks. I'm going to do transform. Notice it remembered my last component, so I could always come back and make a change to that. I could push that along and it's going to get recorded. Okay. I'm going to hit the little X next to components, and I'll go ahead and grab this mount. I'm going to drag that to the left also, maybe like here. Okay. Now here's my first tip. Instead of saying okay, I'm just going to clear my selection. So I'm going to go ahead and clear that selection, and I'm still in my move or my transform. So I'm not having to go to the menu over and over again. In fact, we'll pretty much do everything with just this one menu over here on the right. So I've moved the front, I've moved this mount. There's also the glass mask, and the glass gasket. So check this out. I can actually come in here and select the glass. I'm going to control my selection by holding down my control key, and I can grab the gasket. And then finally, I'm also going to grab the mask. Okay? And let's just drag this to the left a little bit, like so. So it's moving all three of those components all at the same time, almost like we've grouped them together. I'll clear my component, and now maybe I'll just grab the glass, and let's just pull the glass forward maybe to here. I'll clear my selection, click on the glass mask gasket. Let's just move that maybe to kind of toward the middle a little bit. Okay. And then I'll clear that, and I can either pick it on the screen or I can pick it from the browser, and I'll bring the mask back like so. Okay. So we moved all three of these almost like a grouping or like a sub-assembly. We moved them where we wanted, and then we kind of broke them apart. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and say okay for now, just so we can do some other things. But if I were to rotate this, we can now see that we've pulled all of these components out. And I can always come back and, move these if I need to. So I could grab, I'm going to control my selection. I'm going to grab all of those. In fact, maybe I'll leave that guy. And let's just drag those a little bit farther forward. So I can always come back and kind of tweak my design. Okay. So let's take a look at that. So that looks pretty cool. Pretty evenly spaced. Okay, so that's kind of the front of the whole thing. So now let's maybe work on the back of it now, and we're going to kind of leave the center part where it is. So I'm going to grab that guy, but I also want to move everything that has to do with this also. So I'm going to grab that guy and that guy, so the stake and the stake pivot. We can kind of see if I scroll down all of the things that it's picked and stuff. Okay. There's the stake pivot. I'm also going to zoom up a little bit. I'm going to grab the nut, okay, and then the handle is kind of behind it. So I'm just going to click and hold, and you've seen me use this before where you can pick through, and pick like edges and faces and stuff, but notice in here it's allowing me to actually pick different parts or different components. So I'm going to grab, this is that little knob guy, okay? Now, notice what happened with my arrows. Now they are pointing like to the right and not in line with this component. So here's another little trick. I'm going to unselect this guy, okay, and then I'm going to select him again. And because it was the last thing I selected, it reorients my pivot to be in line with this guy. So another little tip right there. If it's not pointing in the right direction, you can like unselect, for example, this component and then reselect it to have it be the last selection. Or I could come in here and say set pivot. Okay, so what this allows me to do, in fact, let me go ahead and kind of put this back to normal. I'm going to set it there. Notice my pivot is now on the last thing I selected, which was this stake pivot, but you'll notice the arrow is pointing the wrong direction. Okay, so I'm going to say set pivot. And what this allows me to do is to reference anything else, okay? So I could come over here, for example, and click on an edge, like this edge here, or I could click on this part here, for example, or whatever, and it's going to reference that edge. Okay, now you can see it jumping around because there's a lot of edges or whatever, but I'm just going to go ahead and click on that face, for example. Now I have to remember to say I'm done setting my pivot. Okay, so I'm going to check that, and now I can drag these components, and I'm going to drag them pretty far back because we have a lot of stuff going on in there. So I'm going to drag this back to here, and you'll notice it's staying in line with this. In fact, I could even turn on trail visibility if I wanted to, and it's going to show the direction that those lines are going. But so let's just go maybe to right there, okay? Let me pull it back just a little bit further, and I'll say, I could say okay, but again, I'm trying to remember, just hit the little X right here, and now I can grab, for example, this component and this component, okay? And again, notice the orientation is incorrect, so I'm going to say set my pivot. I'll just click on an edge or a face or something like that. And I'm just going to drag this down, okay? Now, if I rotate, you'll notice I forgot to bring the knob and the nut at the same time. And if I just add that in there, it's not going to snap down, okay? So I'm going to undo so it goes back to where it needs to go. Then I can control select. So undo can really help you in situations like this where I accidentally forgot something, or I moved a whole bunch of stuff and one little screw didn't move. I could undo back and grab it. So now I'm going to drag this down, and we can see, sure enough, the knob and the nut moved with it. Okay, I'll cancel that guy. I'll click on this guy, and let's move that one down just a little bit. I'll cancel or uncheck my selection. I'll click on the knob, and I'm just going to drag it back. And I'm kind of doing this in 3D so you can kind of see what's going on here. And sometimes I'll rotate around and get it kind of positioned where I want it to be, like how far back do I want it. Because what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to be creating a drawing of kind of like this isometric view. So sometimes I'll try and get my view to be kind of isometric like this and see what's being blocked. Do I need to spread these things out a little bit more? So I try and get it as close as I can to kind of the view that it's going to be. So for example, I just clicked on this corner of the cube, and I can see I could probably bring that knob back in a little bit. Okay, let me click on the hex nut there, and I'll just bring this over here a little bit, kind of equal spacing. So that's another tip that I'll use, is I'll kind of get this in the orientation that is pretty close to what I want it to be. Okay, so pretty quickly here we've kind of broken apart the front housing stuff and the rear housing stuff. Now that what's left is all of this kind of center stuff. Okay, so I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'll say transform, and let's just grab these gears. So I'm going to control select these gears, and I'm just going to bring them forward a little bit, somewhere like so. And I'll leave them grouped together since that's kind of how they're going to end up, you know, on the actual assembly. Okay. Now, here is where I want to start working with this circuit board. And there's actually a lot of components. You'll also notice you see some wires and some sketches going on and all that kind of stuff. Now, you're going to see here pretty quick, we're not going to be able to move the wires. And they don't even show up in my browser, but we'll get to that here in just a minute. If I were to come in here and select the, let me scroll down just a little bit, the star board. If I were to just grab the board in this particular situation, you'll see, sure enough, it moves the circuit board, but all of my connectors stayed put because I added those later. I've got these screws in here that kind of hold the board. Maybe I want to move all of those together. Okay, so I'm going to undo back. And now I can come in and select, for example, I'm going to add, oops, let me, because I moved, it wanted to jump again. So let me do that again. Let me go move. What's the component? So I'm going to grab the star board. Scroll down here. I'm having a hard time seeing. There it is. So I'm going to say that's the star board. I'll zoom up so I can make sure I'm grabbing everything I need. So I'm going to select these 4 screws, and I can, like I said, I can either do it on the screen itself, or I could have done it from the browser. Then I'm also going to make sure I grab my connectors, and so I can kind of see just by hovering over these, you see them highlight on the screen. So I know that those are my connectors, so I'm going to add in all of those connectors, and then finally I have one more connector on here that I want to make sure that I add, which is this guy. Okay, I want them all to move together. And let me make sure I'll grab that guy also. Okay, so anything that kind of has to do with the board and the connectors. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit, kind of see how much room I have. And let's just drag this back a little bit. Okay, maybe somewhere like so. I'll stop my selection. Let's zoom up here, and sure enough, I mean, I see some wires and stuff, but like I said, I can't move those wires. But it looks like everything that I wanted to move did move, so that's good news. Well, now I want to show the screws kind of assembling this. So I'm going to grab that screw here, here, and here, and here. Now again, I could have organized my browser. I could have created a subcomponent called screws and put these 4 inside that subcomponent and then just moved that subcomponent, for example. So kind of a quick way to speed things up. But there we go. Okay. Now, since everything's looking pretty good, I'm going to grab the laser diodes, those 2 laser diodes, and I'm also going to grab the heatsink at the same time. And let's just pull those back a little bit, like so. Maybe I'll bring the heatsink back a little bit. And now you can kind of see, you know, didn't give myself enough room, for example. But that's okay, we can move things around. So I'm going to go ahead and now grab the laser diodes. And let's just, and notice in this situation, my pivot is not pointing in the right direction. So I'm going to set my pivot, and I'm just going to grab like one of these edges of this heatsink. That should be good. And let's just drag that forward a little bit. And now we can kind of see that, you know, the laser diodes are going to go into the heatsink. You know, the board and the screws are all going to assemble back here. let's work with the stepper motor now. So I'll do a transform. And let's just look for the tin can stepper motor, which is right here. And this is another reason why you definitely want to label your parts. Give them names. For example, I also need to move the drive shaft. There it is. If I left everything numbered 99461A or whatever, I'd have to turn parts on and off. It's much more difficult. So definitely give your parts some names. So I'm going to slide the stepper motor back, and let's just maybe move it down a little bit like so. And back. Okay. Then I might grab the drive shaft and let's just pull that off of the stepper motor a little bit. So we're kind of grouping a lot of the internals right here. Okay. I'll go ahead and say okay for now. Oh, I must have undid too far back, so let me move the gears. Apologize. Let's do that guy, and that guy. Pull them forward. Say okay. Okay, so we pretty much have everything out of this center housing except for these wires. Now, if I were to look over here, you will not see a bodies folder. You only see components. In fact, if I fold that up, pretty much everything goes away. Okay? And in my example, these wires are actually a body. They are not a component. So I don't see them in this list. So how do I get rid of them? Well, all I need to do is switch back to my design workspace. Okay? Notice it's all assembled because we're only doing that exploded view in the animation workspace. And what I can do here is I can turn off, in fact, let me turn off the back housing so you can kind of see what's going on here. I'm going to turn off the bodies and you'll see that those wires disappeared. Okay. You'll also notice that some of my construction geometry and sketches that I used to create those wires are being displayed. So I could come here and turn off my sketches. And then finally, those little axes that you see in here, I could turn off my construction and those will go away. I'll turn the back housing back on. Okay. Then I'll switch over into my animation workspace. And we'll see that those are no longer being displayed. So you can turn them on or off just by going back to the design workspace and turning off those bodies. Okay, so pretty quickly, here in just a few minutes, we created this exploded view. Now I might come in here and make some changes. So for example, I might bring these guys back closer. So I'm just gonna go ahead and select these features. Okay. Making sure my pivot is pointing in the right direction, and I can reference anything to do that. So I'll just grab one of these ribs because it's pretty easy. So I can bring that forward a little bit like so. Okay, and then maybe the same thing with all of these guys. So I can just grab these four components here. Okay, and let's just bring them back a little bit. Like so. So now everything's kind of evenly spaced. I'll go ahead and say okay. And we now have kind of this exploded view of our assembly. I'll go ahead and save. I'll say created exploded view. Okay. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about, how to do individual step animations or whatever, but I will show you a cool little tip here. So you'll notice that all of my components here have this little move icon next to it. And this move literally happens in 1 second. Okay, so I'm going to come in here and hit play, and you'll see that pretty quickly it kind of explodes out. Well, maybe I want to show an animation of this thing exploding out, but I want it to last much longer. So I'm going to go ahead and select that first component, and then I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom and shift select that last component. Okay, Then I can come in here and drag this to the right. So I'm going to drag it kind of near about 8 seconds. I'm going to let it go. Now, it's having to do a lot of thinking, so it might take some time to do that. But notice what it did. It now extended this move to last 8 seconds. And in fact, my little target here is at 1 second. We can see it's barely opened up. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so I'm going to, let's scroll back up to the top. And I'll rewind. I'll hit play. And you'll see the parts kind of explode out over a series of about 8 seconds. Now you also saw the camera move a little bit. So if I start here, you'll see it's kind of close up and then it kind of zooms away. And that's this little camera icon right here. And it actually records any movement that I do. But I could also stretch that guy out to about 8 seconds. And now as it explodes, it's going to be much slower as it kind of pans away and makes sure that there's enough room for all of these parts to be displayed in the viewport. So kind of a cool little tip there. If you wanted to show how this thing explodes out, you can change the length of how long it takes just by dragging these out. Now I do have a live stream all about the animation module, so I'll try and remember to link that in this live stream where I go step by step and I show all of the different options. I'm not going to go into that much detail in this live stream. I just wanted to get an exploded view. Okay, I'll go ahead and save it since we've made some changes. I'll say exploded slower. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I'm done with this. I'm going to switch back to my design workspace. And you'll notice that it's put together. We have not physically moved any of these. We only did it in the animation workspace. Well, now I want to create a drawing set. So I'm going to come in here and say Design, Drawing, and you'll notice it says From Design or From Animation. So this is how you can actually create like an exploded view. So I'm going to go ahead and click on From Animation. Now you'll notice it kind of jumps back into the animation workspace and it gives me some options here. Which storyboard? Storyboard 1 or Storyboard 2? You can have multiple storyboards. So for example, maybe you're doing something really complicated, like you're taking apart a V8 engine. You might not want to have, 300 steps. You could break it down into smaller storyboards where you take, the top of the engine off. Okay, maybe that's one storyboard, and then the second storyboard is removing all of the pistons and cams and stuff like that. For example, you could do multiple storyboards. Well, in this case, we'll do the one we just created. I'm going to do, let's just do maybe like a D size drawing in this case, and I'm going to say OK. Notice it gives me a warning here saying mesh, T-spline, or surface bodies will not be included. Now, why is it telling me this? Well, because I might have some mesh objects, I might have some T-spline objects I created, or just plain surface bodies. And so those will not be displayed, but that's okay. I don't have any of those in this particular design. So I'll say okay. Okay. I just glanced at the chat really quick and Peter asked a question, how do I delete a storyboard? That's a great question. I'm going to create this drawing really quick and I'll answer that for you. Okay, so you'll notice it has my title block up and then you see this exploded view on my cursor basically. Okay, now it's pointing a different direction than what I want it to be. So that's this orientation right here where it says home. I could change this. I could say, show me a front view exploded and watch what it does. I mean, it'll give me that particular view, for example. Okay. Or I could come in here and you can see all of these different, southwest, southeast, etc. isometrics. Let's try a northwest isometric. And that is what I was looking for. Okay. That's the direction. And this is why I was talking about earlier. I try and get my view the way I want when I'm doing my exploded view in the animation module, so I kind of know how it's going to look when I come over to the drawing. Okay, I'm going to try, it's 1 to 2 right now. Let's try 1 to 1. I should be able to fit, yeah, I should be able to fit most of that onto the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and place that. I could tell it I want just visible edges. I could make it shaded, which I'm going to do in this case. I could make it so no tangent edges are displayed. I'm going to make full length. I'm going to just go ahead and say OK. And it's going to create a shaded representation of this assembly in an exploded form. Okay. Takes a little bit of time to generate that, but now you can kind of see what that looks like. Okay. Okay. So the next thing I want to do is I want to create a bills of materials. So I'm going to come over to this table right here, this table icon. I'll go ahead and click on it. And I'm going to place it down here. I want it to be near the bottom, but you'll notice that it's going to overlap my view, my drawing basically. So I'm going to go ahead and say I want it to be there, and you'll notice a bunch of things happened. Okay, it placed my table. Unfortunately, it's overlapping. We'll fix that. And then you'll also notice it automatically created these balloons for me. Now they're off my drawing because of how big of the scale I had used. But again, I'm going to show you a cool tip on how to fix that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I don't want this table to overlap my view. Well, maybe it would have fit up here, maybe it wouldn't have. Well, here's a cool little tip. I don't know if any of you guys know this or not, but I'm going to click on my table and you'll notice this little triangle icon right here in the middle. I'm going to click and drag, and I'm going to start dragging to the right, and you'll see another table. In fact, I can keep going and it's going to split it into 3 tables. So I'm just going to do maybe something like so. Okay, so I'll go ahead and pick, and it basically split my table in half, or as you saw, I could even made it go into 3. Okay, so now it's no longer overlapping my drawing. So let me do that again. I'll click on it, and you can see, I apologize, my dog's snoring in the background. I don't know if the microphone's picking that up, but I'm going to drag it to 3. Okay. That was crazy loud. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm going to drag it like so, click, and you can see I actually split the table into 3. And you can always come back and change that. So I can bring this back up and bring it back to 2, for example. Okay. You'll notice that there's quantities and all that kind of stuff, and the names of them in here. Okay. What material they're made out of. Now, I didn't mess with materials at all. I probably should have. You know, make it glass, make it plastic, make it aluminum, etc. And I will show you. Jason, don't let me forget to show that. At the end, I'll show how you can do that. Okay, so now I have the table the way I want. Now I have these balloons, and you'll notice that they're pointing to my objects, and most of them are pretty good. They're kind of near the center, but for example, like this arrow here is kind of toward the back. If I just click on that arrow, you'll see I get this little gray box, and I can drag that and move it to anywhere else on the object. Oh, let me make sure I'm dragging that guy. So for example, you can kind of see right there, and it's going to snap automatically to that object. Okay. So same thing with like this guy here. I can move him to be more in line with, you know, the body itself or whatever. So even though it automatically creates these for you, it's not 100% perfect. I might want to come in and change some of those. I also might want to change where the balloon is. So for example, this balloon is pointing to this bottom gear. Okay, so I'm going to grab the number, drag that gray box, and I can bring it down here, for example. And then I might also change where it's pointing to. Let me just grab and point it to maybe like an edge here. Okay. So now the balloon is pointing, the arrow is pointing to that bottom gear. Same thing with maybe this guy, number 15, it's pointing to a screw. I might bring that down here a little bit. And again, I'm not too worried about are they lined up, because you're gonna see a really cool trick here in just a minute. So I'm gonna move that to this screw over here, okay? And obviously I forgot to explode those screws out. So I could go back and make that change, which I probably will here in just a minute. Same thing with the drive shaft. That's this guy. So let me just move him down a little bit. Move the arrow over. So I'll just bring that over to here. Okay, and now it's positioned down here. Okay, so a little bit of cleanup, not too bad. Let's just do this, and I could maybe point to that guy there. Okay. And we'll get to these back here in just a moment. I just kind of wanted to clean some of this stuff up. Okay, now here's a really cool tip. So all of these numbers, these balloons, are kind of in the wrong location. I'm gonna go under Tables and say Align Balloons. So it's asking which ones do I want to do. So I can come in here and let me make sure I'm grabbing these guys. Oops, sorry. Let me go Table, Align Balloons. So I should be able to grab a bunch of these. So I'm going to just click on a whole bunch of these like so. Maybe I'll just start with those. And then it says, I'll hit Enter. And then I can pick one of these and watch what happens as I'm moving around. So I made a mistake here. I'll fix it here in a little bit, but you can kind of see I can align these balloons. So what I should have done, I'm going to escape out. What I should have done is got one where I kind of want it to be. So I want it to be right about here. Darn it. Click too fast. So I'm going to just say, like, for example, right there. Then I can come in and say Align Balloons. And I can select the balloons that I want. So again, I'll just quickly grab these guys like so. I'll hit Enter. Now it says specify a start point. And so I'm starting at that original balloon, and you can kind of see how it's going to let me put these wherever I want, and they're all going to be lined up. They're still pointing to the objects no matter how closely spaced they are. So I could do something like that. And now they're all in line with each other. And I can still come in and make, minor changes, like I want it to snap there, for example. So same thing with these guys. Obviously, this number here needs to be over here somewhere. Maybe this number here I want to be down here, and I'll point that down there somewhere. Okay, so what I can do now is come in and maybe position these guys and fix these ones that are kind of crowded up in the corner. So I'll do the exact same thing. I'll say Align Balloons, pick the ones that I want. Okay, and I'll obviously fix number 18 here. Specify the first point. And then this will let me, maybe kind of make this look a little bit nicer, like so. I'll point this guy right here, something like that. And then bring the other ones that I don't need down here. So it's a really quick way. Yes, it auto balloons them for you and auto positions them for you, but then you can come back and make, minor changes until it looks really nice. In fact, I'm just kind of dragging these around a little bit, and now I've got things looking the way I want. So let's do the exact same thing one more time. Align Balloons. I'll just grab these that I've brought down here. Okay. Maybe start right here and bring them over, something like that. So they're all in line. And then over here, I can say these three, Enter, and I want those, lined up vertically like so. So now I've got all of these things labeled with these balloons. Okay, Now, the next thing I want to show, and it's going to be kind of hard to see because it's such a big drawing, but notice item number 1 is called center housing. So I've got all these balloons, and item number 1 is the center housing. But maybe I want to organize these so they make more sense. They're in the correct order. So under tables, I can say renumber. I'm going to zoom up a little bit so you can kind of see the whole table here. As I'm going through, watch what happens to this table. So it says, what's your selection and what's your starting number? Well, I'm going to click on that guy, and it's going to be number 1. And then I'm just going to keep clicking and watch. You're going to see the table actually moving things around as I'm going through. So I'll make that 6. Maybe I'll make that guy 7. We'll come back up here to 8, etc. Right? So I'm just going to keep clicking, and you can see how it's renumbering these guys. Again, and then we'll make that 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. I'll say okay. And now I've renumbered these. And now we can see number 1 is front housing, which makes sense, right? And it used to be center housing. Center housing is now number 8. And if we scroll up here, sure enough, number 8 is center housing. So I really like not only being able to create the table and make it look the way we want, the fact that you can come in here and renumber those and align the balloons the way you want. You can point the arrows where you want to make your drawing look really nice and sharp. I wouldn't just use the default solution that it gives you. Spend a little bit of time kind of fixing things up. Okay. Let's move on. So now I have what I would say a pretty cool looking exploded view of our assembly. So now I want to start breaking out the single parts. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this little plus symbol, and this is going to allow me to create another sheet in our drawing set. Then I'm going to say I want to create a base view. So I'll click on that icon, and it's going to allow me to place a base view. Now I want to do individual components. So I'm going to, let's set this to 1 to 1, and I'm just going to click on my screen. I really don't care where or what right now. I'll say OK, and you'll notice that it lists everything in our whole assembly, and it creates a drawing representation of that. Well, I want just the front housing. So I'm going to click on front housing. I'm going to right mouse click, and notice I can either suppress just that one, or I can say suppress all except selected. And that's the one I'm going to use. I'm going to say suppress all except for selected, and you'll notice it's going to turn off all of the other parts and only draw this front housing. Now, most of you are probably going, something's not looking good here. So we're going to fix this. You'll see here in just a second. So now I'm doing my projected view. So I'm going to go there. I'll go here. Maybe do like one of these isometric ones. And these don't look good, right? Well, why is that? Well, that's because, let me go back to my design here. And if I look at the front, I told it to create a front representation, and sure enough, that's what it did. But this whole assembly is tilted. So how would I get a true front representation here? So here's another neat little tip not a lot of people know about. Named views, and it's folded up. If I expand this open, you're going to see top, front, right. In fact, I could click on top, and it's going to show me a top view. I'm going to click on front. It's almost like clicking on the cube over here. Okay? Well, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate a little bit isometrically, and there is a command right here in the bottom of our screen called Look At. And that allows you to click on any face, and it's going to look right at that face. So I'm going to say Look At, and I'm going to click this flat front face right here. And we're now looking exactly at that face. Let me show that again. Maybe let's try something a little weirder. I'm going to say look at, and I'll click this flat face of the hex, and it's going to look straight at that face of the hex nut. Okay? So it's kind of a neat little trick. So I'm going to come in here and say look at. I'll click that front face. Then I can right click on my named views and say new named view. Okay? And it creates a new view. And I can even give it a name. I'll call this true front or something like that. Or maybe angled front. That's what I should call it. Angled front view. Okay? Now watch what happens. If I go, you know, top, right, etc., home. If I click on this angled front view, it's going to go and record or go right to that view. So it's a neat little trick. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save because I've made a change. So I'm going to say added angled view. Okay. Then I'm going to come over to my drawing. And when I come over to my drawing, you'll notice it says, warning, changes have been made. That's because I've updated my assembly. So I can click on this little icon right here, and it's going to update my drawing to be using the latest and greatest representation. Now, we didn't change any 3D models, so we wouldn't see anything change on here or anything change here either. But for example, if we punched a big hole through the front housing and saved that, when I came to this drawing, it would complain and say, hey, this drawing is not up to date. And when I clicked on that icon, it would recreate this view to have that big hole through the front housing. Okay? Okay, so what do we do about this? Well, I'm going to go ahead and edit this front view. So I'll say edit view. And notice it says orientation is front. Well, if I click on this down arrow, you will now see that we have my saved view that I created, that angled front view. So I'm going to click on that and notice it's now looking straight at that location. And my views are correct. So hopefully that makes sense, what I did there. Even though the part is rotated at some weird angle, I still have the ability to look at it straight on. Okay? I can come in here, edit my views. We'll make that solid. I could create a section view. So let me do a section view, maybe of this guy here. It automatically finds the center for me, so we know that that's a true circle. I'll come over here and place my section view. Say okay, and sure enough, there we see the section view. So let me do that one more time. I'll create another sheet, base view. Okay. I'll set it to 1:1, like so. And I'm just gonna throw it on the screen. Again, I don't really care right now. Okay, let's do the complicated part. We'll pick the center housing this time. So I'm going to click on center housing, right mouse click and say suppress all except for the selected one. Okay. Then I'll come in here and edit my view. Change it to my angled front view. Let's see what that looks like. I want to show all of the edges. We'll make it scale 1:1. And now I can create projected views off of this view here. So I can do all of my top right isometric section views, etc. Oops. I like to have these shaded. There we go. Okay. Now, for those of you that have played around with the drawing environments, there is a really cool option So I could come in here and say, now again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing this. I have a live stream on it, all about drawings. But I could come in here and say, new drawing. And you'll notice that there's this new drawing template. Okay? And what this allows you to do is to actually create like a top, front, right, and have an isometric that's shaded, and the default scale is 1. And it has general notes and all that kind of stuff. And then when you say create a drawing from design, you can actually pick that template. Now I don't have any right now, but I would come in here and you would see, you know, whatever template I named it, Brad's exploded template or something like that. And it would automatically create all of these sheets for you. So the first sheet would be an exploded with a table. The second, sheet would be individual components with a top, front, right, and a shaded view, etc., etc. And it actually creates all of that stuff for you automatically. It's pretty cool. Like I said, I'm not going to show that in this example here, but okay, now that I have this guy, I could spend the time to dimension it. So, put my center lines in there. Maybe I want this view to have hidden lines, okay? Then I can start dimensioning. So here is, actually here's another tip I want to share with you. I get this question a lot. My dimensions are really small, I can barely read them, okay? Well, down here is your annotation settings. So I'm going to click on that guy, and we can specify what font we want to use. We can specify the text height. So I'm going to do the 0.24. We can specify, is it decimal or fractional? What's the precision? 2 decimal places, 3 decimal places, 1 decimal place, for example. And then does it display the annotation unit? Does it display trailing zeros and leading zeros? So for example, I set the text height and I set the trailing and leading zeros. So now when I do a dimension, for like that, I'll do another dimension here. You can see there's the 3 decimal places with the trailing zeros, okay? And this is extremely smart. I'm still in the same dimension command, so there it just did some diameters. Now it's doing, dimensions. If I were to click, this line and this line, it's gonna do angles for me. It does radiuses. So let me see if I have a radius. Let me zoom up here real quick. And I'm using the exact same dimension command to do all of those dimensions. Pretty slick. Okay, I'm going to go back and answer that question about the in the animation workspace, the storyboard. So I'm going to jump back to my animation workspace, okay? And the question was, what if I accidentally created a storyboard? You can right-click on any of these storyboards down at the bottom, and you'll see you can delete them, you can copy them, you can even reverse them. So instead of it exploding out, I'm going to say reverse, okay? And then it's going to think for a little bit. What it'll do is it'll actually assemble it together. So instead of exploding out, it's going to kind of go back in. So it's reorganizing all of these. And so let me rewind. Let me go to Storyboard 2. There we go. I'll rewind. So there's that guy. Okay. I'm sorry. I reversed Storyboard 1. Brain's not working. Okay, so now this should be reversed. It's going to be really slow, but now it should show it going back together. So instead of, really slow, it's going to be really fast. It's starting exploded and then putting it back together. So you can do the reverse. So that's how when you right click here, you can delete any of those if you accidentally create some. Okay, now we use Storyboard 2. I'm going to make a change to this. So I'm going to transform, and I'm going to put these guys in front of the housing. Okay, and in fact, let's pull that back just a little bit, just to make a significant change that you guys will recognize. Not that I would put them in front of the housing, but you get the idea here. Okay, so I'll say, okay. I'll go ahead and save this whole assembly. Moved glass. Okay. So I made a change to my storyboard. I'm going to go back to my drawing, and you'll notice it says warnings, changes have been made. Okay. Well, let's go to this front image here, and you'll notice nothing has changed yet. That's because I have to click on this icon here. It says drawing is out of date. It's referencing an older version of the design. Also notice because I changed my text height, my table got really big, so I'm going to have to fix that here in just a second. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that icon, and we should see that this will update and the glass will move in front of the plastic front housing. Okay, and there we go. And you'll see now it kept the BOM numbers and stuff like that, so maybe I need to renumber these. I might need to scale it down a little bit or reposition it or whatever, just because of the spacing or whatever. But you can always go back and make a change to your storyboard, and the drawing will update accordingly. So for example, I don't like how crowded this is right here. I would probably go back to my storyboard and move some of these around so I have a better representation of what that's going to look like. Okay, so this is the end of this project. Now I know some of you were like hoping that you could 3D print it and actually like make the lasers work and project things, and that's not what this was all about. It was more about taking something, kind of reverse engineering it, and showing you how would you go about designing plastic parts, multiple components, linked components, bringing in ECAD stuff like the circuit board, for example. So this project kind of covered a lot of that, adding realistic materials and decals. I hope you all learned a lot from this series. I personally learned some stuff doing it. I'd like to do more things like this in the future, so make sure that you are watching our live streams. Give me just a second here. Bring it over to the correct screen here. Like I said, we have a bunch of upcoming live streams, and you'll see even more. So, here's ECAD, here's our Hangout. Like I mentioned, Jason's doing one on AnyCAD. I think tomorrow, I'm sorry, next week. I apologize. There's the date right there. So make sure you've signed up for these, okay? Let me jump back to my camera. Sorry about that. So with that, I want to thank everybody for sitting with me on this series. Hope to see you on a future live stream, and have fun fusioning.